In the Hebrew Bible, what we often call the Old Testament, the sea is always a symbol for chaos and upheaval. God and only God is more powerful than these great, turbulent, stormy bodies of water. Many stories name God's immense power over the sea. Probably the most familiar one, a favored one, is the Exodus story, where Moses is leading the Israelites out of Egypt and they come to the Red Sea, and God parts the waters so there's dry land on which they can cross. It's an amazing story of the power of God. In the Psalms, many places, it mentions that God is mightier than the thunder of great waters, and it is only God who can rescue ships from these stormy seas. When we have this in mind, that God is more powerful than the seas and the storms, it's very important then to look at the story of Jesus walking on the water. It has great meaning, doesn't it? In the midst of the wild wind and waves, as told in Mark's Gospel in chapter 6, Jesus comes walking across the water to his disciples who are battling the storm in this little boat. And when he eventually steps into the boat, the sea is completely calmed. A story shows that Jesus seems to be incredibly powerful.
The second story, told earlier in Mark's Gospel in chapter 4, reads like this. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat onto the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Here ends the reading from Mark's Gospel.
So if you pick up nothing else from reading the amazing ancient stories of the Old Testament about how God moves in the world, you just can't miss this theme that nothing and no one is more powerful than God. That God alone is more powerful than the mighty seas, which in that part of the world, those stormy seas, were the most powerful thing in creation that people could name. So then when we read about Jesus walking on the water and calming the stormy seas, you cannot miss but see what is being shown here, that Jesus is full of the power of God. Jesus is full of that power. And so when we hear this, we realize that perhaps this is a way of saying that Jesus is putting a face to the power of God. Now, these are great stories to think about in Advent because we're trying to fathom how that power of God can be in the person of Jesus and what his birth is going to bring into the world, into this crazy, chaotic world where there is disorder and confusion and mayhem and disarray and upheaval and commotion of all kinds. It is pretty chaotic out there, and lots of it is troubles bubbling up all over the place, washing over us every day like giant stormy waves. Globally, in our own country, here in this valley, closer to home in our personal lives, we feel this chaos. Many would say that the church as a whole, not just our church or the United Methodist, the church is in chaos. We know things are rapidly changing around us. We know that church has to be different in some ways if it's going to bring its message of God's love into this chaos. But we aren't really sure what happens next. And that's the hardest thing about chaos. We really don't know, and we don't get to control what it is that happens next. But chaos is so often a necessary part of positive change of any magnitude. The very first verse of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, says this: "In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep." That little phrase, the deep, can be translated primordial chaos. Primordial chaos, the essential ingredient in God creating, was chaos. God creates out of chaos. This is very good for us to know when we look at the world around us. But you say, now, Barbara, this is scripture, and as you often tell us, this is not science, and it's not intended to be read in some literal way as fact. And that is true. But what's interesting here is that more and more, what it says there at the very beginning of Genesis seems to be reflected somewhat in the scientific community. Chaos theory, that has been around since the early 1900s, got a foothold, more of a strong following in the 70s. Without attempting to give you any lengthy description of it, which I'm entirely incapable of doing anyway, let me simply say that chaos theory recognizes many simple, completely predictable systems in our world. Weather patterns, for instance. We know what ingredients create different kinds of storms. But chaos theory further recognizes that extremely small changes in the initial conditions that pertain to the weather can vastly change the outcome. You might have heard this called the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flapping its wings in some remote part of the world impacts the weather in some very, very far away location. This suggests to us at one level that everything comes from chaos and that we live in chaos. And that is one thing that the scientific community is beginning to embrace more and more. There is truth in this. And another feature, and this is just as important in chaos theory, is that chaos, in a sense, is seeking order. Something somehow wanting to create order. There's a big picture, for instance, in weather. We can't see it when we're walking around here in Boise, Idaho, but from global satellites, we can see the great patterns and how they emerge and disappear all over the planet. There is order in the chaos, in the order in the chaos. I bring this up to suggest that there's an important relationship in our own lives between chaos and order, chaos and ongoing creation and creativity. There is something that anchors it all, something unseen. For example, from chaos, some unpredictable features come together, and when they come together, you can predict a tornado. That tornado comes into focus, into being from the chaos. It's created. And interestingly enough, in the very center of that tornado, in the eye of that storm, it's completely still and quiet. When I bring this idea back to our metaphor of thinking about God in our lives, I think we can see that some of the most wonderful and blessed things that happen in life truly rise from chaos. There's so much we don't get to control. There's things that we do add, our choices. There's all kinds of possibilities. It's kind of like we're living in perpetual butterfly effect. That is wonderful and surprising and completely scary because we really don't know what is going to happen next. But if we recognize that chaos is the beginning of all things, whether you're looking at scripture or science, if we recognize that God is more powerful than chaos, that God creates from chaos, and if we recognize further that power coming into the world in human form in Jesus, who stills the storms, who walks on the water, If we see this power, we begin to see that God's power moves not just in Jesus, but perhaps in the chaos of our lives as well. And I think if we reach the point where we trust this, then we find that sense of peace, a stillness, a calm, a peace inside in the midst of the chaos from which our lives are rising all the time. When I was a kid, just about this time of year, every year my family went to the ice follies. Do some of you know the ice follies? This was a very, very big deal when I was a kid. It was a favorite family tradition of ours. If you don't know the Ice Follies, it's one of those fantastic shows on ice with 25 female skaters who do these incredible dance numbers and all kinds of soloists and specialists and stars. And they have beautiful costumes and lightings and stage settings. It's just spectacular, really cool if you're a kid. And it always ended with this number where the women skaters come out onto the ice and they all look fabulous and they're all doing these beautiful, fascinating twists and turns and leaps and spins, and you really don't even know where to put your eye. It's so fascinating all around. And then you notice that in the very center of the ring, there are people, some of the skaters are forming a bit of a line. Tyler, can I get you and Nicole to come down here for a second? I want you to hold this arm facing that way, and you hold this arm facing this way. Okay, can you picture? And they begin to do a little turn like this, all right? They're turning. And 2 by 2, nice move. 2 by 2, skaters come and join each end of this. Thank you very much. And as they continue skating, and 2 skaters, 1 at each end, keep adding on, those end skaters have to skate faster and faster to hook on to this beautiful circling line. Eventually, it's down to the last 2 skaters. And everybody's watching with anticipating because they are speed skating to hook on to this beautiful moving circle. And when they hook up, everybody's clapping and cheering and laughing. And there was one of these times when my dad leaned over and said to me, "Look at the woman in the center." And the woman in the center was barely moving at all. In fact, she was standing in one place and turning super slowly like this, while everyone around her was skating faster and faster and faster just to keep up. Oh, there's something in this for us, I think, because she held the power. She had the power to hold it all together while barely moving. So here we are on December 1st, and I think all of us realize that we have things we want to do or need to do or tradition and family says we should do, and there's some things that we choose and some things we don't seem to get to choose as Christmas draws near. And I believe we can navigate all of it creatively and wisely if we simply open ourselves to God this season. Really open yourself so that God is the center, is the quiet, still center. The presence of peace in your life that empowers you and holds you all together while you are out there in that chaos, holding that stillness inside as your life rises from it. May this be so this Advent season.